nice to have you here. Did you enjoy the conference until now? So you are tired, right? Okay, so I do my very best not to make it too long. Okay, welcome to my talk, Bring Back the Joy in Web Development with HTMX and Hypermedia. It's nothing fancy, it doesn't involve AI, it doesn't involve something new, basically. So, are you sure you want to be here? Yes, of course. Okay, shortly about me. I'm a father of 2 nice children. I'm going on a triathlon this year again. Since today's my watch tells me I'm in detraining mode, so maybe not a good idea because it's in 6 weeks. I don't know how to keep up with that. I work as a software architect at Adesso in Germany. We also have some offices in Italy. Some colleagues of mine will have a talk tomorrow. I organized the local Java user group in Paderborn, and I'm a Java hipster board member. And I showed my son some recordings of my talk, so he thinks I'm a YouTube star, so I don't know. There will be a new video on YouTube of me, so he tells his friends I'm a YouTuber, but I'm not. What do we look at today? First things, we look at modern front-end development and the complexity it involves. Second part, we will look what hypermedia is and what hypermedia controls are. And then we will look at HTMX and, as a template engine, JTE. Who knows JTE? No one? That's strange. Okay, and we will look at some typical patterns you have in enterprise applications, right? Or in web applications in general, and then we will come to a conclusion. So, modern web development. What's the issue? Well, from my point of view, single-page applications are often used by default. Management says, hey, we need to use Angular. With that, we have API churns. We need to update the APIs for small new features in the UI because the management wants to have them, or the users want to have them. There are a lot of different tools and frameworks involved. And you have a more or less natural team split, right? There is the backend team developing an API, the front-end team developing the front-end, and they have to talk to each other, and you always know communication is hard, so that's not easy. And, well, I just put together some logos of some typical front-end tools. I don't know everything of them, but maybe you know at least all of them. I don't know. I thought, well, that's a lot. That's a lot. And the question of this talk is, does it spark joy? Or can we get rid of it? In my point of view, it doesn't spark joy a lot of times. Don't get me wrong, the technology is really great. So think of Webpack or some bundlers. It's awesome what they do. But is this complexity that it brings to us, is it really worth it? There are a lot of different dependencies you have to manage. I mean, you say Maven downloads the whole internet. Have you tried a Node.js application? I think it downloads 3 times the internet. And it makes it very hard to keep up with latest trends, right? You're starting with Vue.js. Okay, there's a new Vue.js 3. You have to completely overhaul your application. Same with Angular. I remember we had an Angular 1 application, Angular 2 came out, and we decided not to do the move and do something different. In this case, Vue.js, a few years later, Vue.js 3 came out, and we had the same issue with that. So, again, does it spark joy? I'm not the only one saying maybe not. ThoughtWorks published their Tech Radar, you know it maybe, and a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, there was this topic, single-page applications by default. And it says, accepting the complexity of single-page applications by default, even when the business needs don't justify it. And they believe, me too, that many websites will benefit from the simplicity of server-side logic. So, let's be honest. What are you building most of the times? Are you building Figma, Google Maps, Miro? I guess not, right? What are we building as Spring application developers, enterprise applications? They involve forms and all the things. So we are mostly somewhere on the left side, right? So The term is single-page applications are most of the time not needed, but they increase the complexity by a huge factor. But of course, there will be a point in time you have these two levels on the left and the right. Static HTML is just enough, right? You have just static HTML, some links and forms, that's fine. On the right-hand side, you have something like Miro or Figma, where static HTML and server's interaction is, of course, not a good idea. But what's the middle ground, right? There is endless scrolling, you have some dynamic components or some dynamic stuff like reloading the newest comments on your blog post, right? Someone writes something, you want to appear it, or what else? Or just sorting a table, right? Do you want to load the same thing again, the whole page? No, but usually what happens, oh, we need a single page application. Why is that? Or what is the alternative, right? Let's take a short trip back in time. So what is hypermedia? I guess everyone has heard hypermedia or hypertext at least, but where does it come from? I guess it's surprising. Ted Nelson coined that term. I just read it here, or what is important. Hypertexts are a new form of writing appearing on computer screens, so it's important computer screens, that will branch or perform at the reader's command. A hypertext is a non-sequential piece of writing. Only the computer display makes it practical. It sounds a bit strange. Why is he talking about computer displays? Yeah, fun fact, it was 1963 or 1962. Who has heard of Ted Nelson before? Yeah, 1, 2, okay. Ted Nelson was basically a visionary of human-computer interaction. I learned some of his concepts at university, so a long time ago. What is essential for hypertext? It's the non-linear branching model, right? You have a document, you read something, and there are links between documents. It sounds natural to us now, but think of the time, it's the 1960s. And he tried to bring this to life with Project Xanadu, and he envisioned a lot of concepts we today take for granted or was picked up by other technologies. But sadly, Project Xanadu, I think there was a release somewhere in 2000 something. You can read it on the Wikipedia page. The problem was it strived for perfection and it was too academic, so it didn't happen to be the thing. But fun fact, in 1968, I think a colleague of him, or at least related, Douglas Engelbart from Stanford, showed a demo of the Memex containing remote collaborative text editing in the 1960s. There's no JavaScript. Video and audio chat, no JavaScript. And hypertexts were underlined and you could click it and navigate it to a new thing. Today, we knew everything about that, right? It's 1990. Tim Berners-Lee publishes the first website. And with that, HTML, the hypertext markup language, is born. Hyperlinks between documents are the core part of it. And fun fact, in HTML1, forms were not part of the specification. So it was just read-only. Surprisingly, at least to me, because I didn't know it. But then forms were introduced, and what happened? The web grew rapidly. And that's it. That's Web 1.0. It's so simple, but so powerful. Think of Wikipedia as the prime example, right? You can read a document about the Eiffel Tower, and you end up somewhere the best French eclair recipe in the web. And that's really cool. And so simple. So what is now a hypermedia-driven application? Because we don't want to have documents, right? We have applications. We need something more. And a hypermedia-driven application, defined by some authors of a book, we will see later, is just a web application that uses hypermedia and hypermedia exchanges as its primary mechanism for communicating with the server. What does it mean? Hypermedia exchanges means, in particular, we must exchange HTML documents or snippets. So On the other hand, JSON is not a hypermedia exchange because JSON is not a hypermedia document. And the responses, of course, can then be rendered by the client with no upfront knowledge, right? Because it's just HTML and the client is the browser. What does the browser best? Rendering HTML. We don't need a JSON. But sadly, that's why JavaScript came up and single-page applications and all the complexity we have now. HTML stopped at some point to evolve as a hypermedia or hypertext format. So maybe you've asked yourself, why can I have just anchor tags and form tags to make an HTTP request? Why not everything else? Why is there only clicking on the link and submitting a form? Why is it only get and post? And why should we only replace the entire screen? So what about a delete method? We have that at HTTP. Or just replacing small snippets of my application, right? So think of the notification bubble we all know. Yeah? Why can't I just update that? And that's where HTMX comes into place. What is HTMX? Someone heard of it? I guess so. Otherwise you wouldn't be here, right? Okay, what is HTMX? It removes these constraints by completing HTML as a hypertext. From a technical point of view, it's just a small JavaScript library, I think about 14K, and it simplifies AJAX, WebSocket, servers and events, and you can access all these features declaratively with HTML attributes. So it really fits the philosophy of HTML, where you just define, for example, the form tag, and you really see what happens with the form, or happens with an anchor tag, right? You see directly when clicking this anchor tag or this link, you will end up somewhere else. It's not hidden in some JavaScript controller or somewhere else. And the server answers with partial HTML. Another fun fact, who does know the predecessor of HTMX? No one. It's intercooler.js. It was created 2014, so 10 years ago. Basically from the exact same people with the exact same concept, just a different name, so different attributes names, but it didn't gain much traction for whatever reason. Maybe because Angular arose at that time. But HTMX was picked up by different communities. So I think it started with Python, Ruby is there, and then Java, of course, also picked up. What is different? As I said, you can define it in your HTML with just a small set of essential attributes. If you know these attributes and how to use them, you basically know, let's say, 90% of what you can do with HTMX. And the rest is Spring Boot, and as you are here in Spring.io, you know Spring Boot very well. So it's really that simple. So you have an attribute to define what HTTP method to use and where to trigger the request. You have with AJAX target, you define where the response should be put in your DOM element. And AJAX trigger says when to trigger the request. So you can define a click, or you can define, some mouse movement, and it will trigger a request if you like. And with AJAX swap, you define how the element is integrated into your current DOM. How does it look like? A simple example. You have a button, right? And now this button just says, when the button is clicked, a request to /clicked is issued. The result will be swapped into the parent div, so with the ID parent div, and it will swap the whole element. So outer HTML replaces really the element with ID parent div with the response from the server. The default is inner HTML, but in this case it's outer HTML. And that's all. Yeah? So really that simple, and you directly see what's happening. You don't have to, look in some controllers and follow some connections in the code. Coming to JTE. As no one knows JTE, are you using server-side rendering? Great. What template engine are you using? FreeMarker. Welcome, welcome. Yeah, I know it too. Okay, there are a lot of template engines, obviously, for Java and the JVM. Most of them are very mature or old as FreeMarker, right? But nearly none of them is type-safe, right? Many use reflection. And as we all know, reflection doesn't play well with native images in GraalVM. And without type safety, it's a nightmare to refactor something. Have you experienced, right? You just change some naming of a variable and FreeMarker just explodes because it's not there, right? A problem is you can't see what a page really needs, right? You have a page, you have then imports there, and you don't know what is needed maybe somewhere down below in your DOM tree. So does it spark joy? No. JTE does it differently. What does it do? So basically, it really defines what parameters you have. You see it there with add_param, and you can import basically every Java class you like. And then these templates are compiled. So at compile time, it is clear at least what the page needs, and you could also check if it really is passed to the template. And then you have some functions for conditions, for printing stuff, for loop iterations, so the typical stuff. But the important thing is you look at a template and you know what parameters it expects and what type it is. And if you rename this page to, don't know, page object, with IntelliJ, it will be refactored in the template too. So that's pretty awesome. And when you write the template, you get auto-completion like in Java, because basically it's Java code. But fear not, you don't have to use JTE. Basically, you can use Hypermedia on whatever you like. That's also great. You can use Thymeleaf, the feature-rich classic, I would say. The important thing for HTMX working well is that the template engine should support something like fragments, right? You can combine your page with different small macros, so fragments, don't know, the header or the footer, and then the table and the table controls, whatever. And the fragment support means you can render each of these parts independently of the page. FreeMarker does not support that. That's another point. But all these do support it. So if you like mustache, you can use who knows how to pronounce it? I think it's JStachio, I don't know. Maybe, yeah, okay. It's type safe. It compiles the mustache templates to Java code. Then I've heard of HTML Flow and Kotlin X at JavaLand. It's a DSL approach for writing HTML with Java. Looks quite cool, but if you don't use Kotlin, it doesn't feel great. With Kotlin, it's better. If you are on Quarkus, you can use Qt, which is very cool, or you can use Spring View components. Who has been last year? You know Spring View components because you know Thomas, right? View components put all things together at source level. So you have the template, the Java code together at one place. So who knows Wicked? The good old Wicked. Yeah, it feels a bit like Wicked, where you put the template next to the Java code for your component, but with Thymeleaf or JTE. Okay, now we have a server side, we have HTML, but what about client-side state or client-side scripting? We can't leave it out, right? Sometimes you need it. Think of, don't know, a drop-down for your typical profile. You need something. You don't want to do a server request for creating these drop-down and then closing it. You can use, of course, plain or vanilla JavaScript with that, or you can use Alpine.js, which is really working well because you also define declaratively what you are doing. In my current project, there is hotwire or stimulus involved, which is also quite powerful because you write, again, controllers in JavaScript or TypeScript. It's very minimal, but you can apply them declaratively. So it's a mixture. You have more power than with Alpine, but you need some more JavaScript logic when building it. Okay, now we have all building blocks together, and we can look at some patterns. Maybe I will switch to a live demo later on, depending on how it works here with the screen. But let's start with something simple, right? Form validation. I guess everyone needs form validation, and with JavaScript, everyone says, oh, we can do it on the client side. Yeah, everyone knows it's a lie because we have to do it on the server side again. So why do it twice, right? So a typical form, you find the demo on GitHub and Codeberg. You will get the links later. Is it okay, or I shouldn't have used the dark mode, right? But okay, you have 3 input fields, a first name, last name, and a talk, and a submit button. That's it. So how does it look like? First things first, you have just a normal form, right? A form with a submit button, and you can use it without HTMX. You just click submit. It will trigger the request. You will get back the whole page with validated fields and so on. That's cool, because you can use it even without JavaScript, right? But we want to do it a little better, so enhancing the user experience. So we define for the input fields we have there. Remember, I just left out the other 2 there. We define a trigger. When should it trigger? In this case, when the user types something in with a small delay, so it doesn't trigger immediately, and it waits for the end of the interaction. So if it's triggered and HTMX triggers again, the request or the response will be discarded. So there won't be taking requests or responses there. And what happens when this trigger triggers? It posts to /, and it will include, that's the fun fact, the closest form element. So HTMX takes care of putting together the XML form data, so every input field will be sent to the server, because we have, the form DTO object, whatever, and we can only validate it as a whole, not a single field. And what's the target? It's AJAX form, so the form element itself. So far, so good. What is maybe missing? If you do that by default, you type something, the form will be exchanged. What will happen? It will be replaced, and your focus will be lost, because it just replaces the whole DOM. But we can prevent that with a new swap attribute. It's called morph. It's using morph DOM or idiomorph in this case. It's an extension, HTMX extension. And morph DOM or idiomorph are trying to morph from one DOM structure to another. So this keeps your selection, for example, in the input fields alive. So you can type, and the validation triggers, and you can just go on typing without having to focus again. So that's very, very nice. How does it look like on server side? Well, basically, we have 2 post mappings in this case. One post mapping is just a normal post with clicking the submit button, and the other one is annotated with AJAX request. What does it do? Basically, it comes from a third-party library, and it makes sure that that endpoint is only used when it's called from within an HTMX triggered request. What does it mean? HTMX puts a special header You can also configure that, but by default it's AJAX request, and AJAX request just checks if there is a header called AJAX request. So you don't need to use this third-party library. You could also just, I think it's just add header and then the name of the header. But with that, it's quite handsome. So, and it looks like that, right? You type something, and it says the fields are mandatory, and talk must be between 10 and 120 characters. Awesome. We don't need to do it on client side. We need to do it on server side anyway, so no need to do something differently. And we have the fast feedback for the user when typing. That's great. Next thing, tables. I guess everyone has somehow to do with tabular data, showing it, sorting it, paging it, whatever. Yeah, usually it might be okay to have just links for, you can't see. Underneath there is the paging buttons. Maybe I show it live in a few minutes. You can use it with links. It will replace the whole page and so on. But basically it would be enough to render the table, right? You don't need to render the whole page. Again, it's pretty easy. As I said, we just have a few attributes. So the table here, that's the thought thing we have seen. It's targeting the surrounding element, called table wrapper in this case. A new attribute we have here is AJAX push URL. What does it do? It pushes the parameters to the URL so you can navigate with browser forward and browser backward between that. You don't need to do that. I find it very handy because I use it a lot. And what is the request now doing? Well, it's just getting AJAX get to /tables and changing the sort parameters and reusing the page parameters we have. So we stay on the same page, just changing the sort parameter when clicking on some of the table headers. Same you can do for paging. There is the previous button underneath, and of course it also just does a AJAX get to /tables. I think it's the wrong code. It looks strange, but wait. Now you see it. Yeah, it just decreases the page number by one. So just the page before. Where's my mouse? Okay. So that's the client side, and on server side we have seen again we have the get mapping for /tables, loading the whole page. So return table /index template, which contains the header and the menu bar we've seen, and the table. But then when the AJAX request is triggered, we do the same thing. We find all persons we have, put them in the model, so persons and pager we need, and we return just a table. You could do that on different levels. You can even replace just one table row. So think of, don't know, you are entering in a modal form, a modal dialog, a new element for your table, and then you can either decide to load the whole table or just add a small at the table row to that table. Okay, next thing. Endless scrolling is another thing, right? We know endless scrolling from different applications, and we take that for granted and often said, oh, we need JavaScript for that, which is kind of true. How does it look like with JTE? JTE has a nice utility function for lists or iterables, where you can find if the entry is the last one, the first one, and some other meta information. So you can just wrap your list of elements in this for support thing, and then you have access to something like person entry is last. So why do we need that? Well, because if we scroll down, we need to know where the last element is to trigger the new request. How does it look like? We just need, again, a few attributes. In this case, we just say AJAX get to endless scrolling, and we just increase the page number by one. The rest stays the same, so same page size, but basically the next page. Now we see again AJAX trigger intersect once. Why is that and what it's doing? Basically this request is only triggered if the element intersects the viewport, but only once. Because if you scroll up again, you don't want to have it triggered again, right? And where is it swapped? After the end of this element. So you have, let's say in this case, it's just a list of block quote elements, and the new response is just added after this one. Simple as that. Maybe we can show that. We'll just try to mirror, and yes, perfectly fine. Okay, you see here the block quotes. Okay, it's a bit too large. So I will just reload it, and you see it's a whole page, right? We see here some HTMX, JavaScripts, the Spring IO logo we have here. So it loads the whole page and just displays a mixture of mostly wrongly accounted quotes. Maybe you find some obvious one. I don't know. I don't think the G-man said that. But you scroll now. I will just empty this, and you see now I have reached the last element. Or you didn't see it, but you see here is a new request triggered, and it just loaded the next page. And you see it's quite fast. Okay, it's local, but you can imagine what's happening, right? Simple as that. Now let's, ooh, that worked well. Perfect. Okay, so something else is real-time updates. We can use WebSockets for that. We can use server send events for that. In this case, we just use WebSockets. How does it look like? Well, WebSockets are also an HTMX extension. So you have to integrate it or load it on demand, and then enable it with AJAX -x and the name of the extension. And then you just define where to connect the WebSocket connection. And in this case, we define an ID for that. Why is it needed? We will see that later. And then on server side, you can just, if you somehow handle the WebSocket connection with Spring WebSockets, you can then broadcast HTML snippets, or you can just send HTML snippets to some specific client, everything you can do with the WebSocket support. And in this case, for the demo purpose, we just update or send a new feed item every 5 seconds or something. That's it. And we just rendered a template. As I said, it must be HTML. And how does this feed item look like? It's maybe not a surprise, but what we see here is there is a new attribute. It's called AJAX swap OOB after begin. What does it mean? It sounds a bit strange. OOB means out of band swap. It's not better than it's OOB. We don't know what out of band swap means, but you have before we've seen the response is taken and something is replaced with that response. And out of band swap means you could send different elements or multiple elements, and one is the main element, which is then replacing the target you defined on client side, and the other ones are then matched by ID, for example, and they will also be replaced. So you have a main fragment, and you have different other small things you can replace with one request. So in this case, we need the out-of-band swap because there is no request and no target defined, right? So we just define the ID of the list, unordered list element, and this LE element is then added after the begin of the element with that ID. Was that clear, right? So what does it mean after begin? Well, newest items pop up first, so older items are coming, are pushed down. But be careful with out-of-band swaps. You can use them, but you should use them with care. Because if you can imagine, you can put a lot of things together, so adding something here, updating something there on your page. You have to be careful with that, because you don't know what's replaced in the end. So be careful. Another thing I find quite handsome is modal dialogues. You think, well, modal dialogues, why? A lot of times you need to create content on demand for your modal dialog, right? You can't put it in your DOM and then just show it. Or you can, but think of, don't know, a delete confirmation in your table, right? You can either then, don't know, put 10 modal dialogues in there with different IDs and just show it with JavaScript. But maybe we can do better, right? We can create this content on demand. We can retrieve the content with HTMX and let Alpine handle the show and hide interaction with the modal. The server then just generates the whole modal content. How does it look like? Well, we have a button. Again, it's just a GET request triggered to modal dialogues. The target is then the modal container on your page, and it's triggered with a click. Simple as that, and it looks like that, right? Maybe we can do a quick demo of that. Okay, perfect. So again, we need the browser console. Maybe we show just the WebSockets, right? We're just waiting now. Here's the WebSocket connection, and you see it's just popping up like that. Now modal dialogues. I would just empty the browser console. You can open it, and you see we have now a random Chuck Norris fact. It was retrieved from the server. If you believe me, I can open another one, and it's another Chuck Norris fact. And these interactions then are just done client-side, right? Just removing or hiding the modal dialog. But if you click confirm, think of the delete confirmation modal, you can again trigger a server interaction, right? In this case, it has triggered something. I think it should be this one. And not a modal dialog is returned, but we are just redirected to this page with the information something has happened, with just Spring Boot methods, right? Redirect attributes and so on. It's nothing special. Okay, where is my... Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we have seen a lot of things you typically build in your application, I'm sure. But there is more. You can do client-side event triggering, right? The server can send a special response header, which is picked up by HTMX, and the HTMX triggers then a client-side event. So you could also open the modal dialog with a client-side event if you like. Or you can trigger a new request to, let's say, loading the somewhere, an indicator, right? Indicator of, don't know, new messages or something, right? If you write a message, and so on. And all the power lies on the server side. You can do transitions and animations, so it feels a bit more fancy. You have servers and events. It's similar to the WebSocket. It's also an extension. And as I said, we all have hypermedia exchanges. You could pave the way to progressive enhancement. I think it's not so relevant today anymore because JavaScript is taken for granted, but all we have seen basically, except the WebSocket parts, could be done without HTMX, right? It's just a link in the table. You have the normal form submit. So you can do that with just regular links and forms. But you should not use HX Boost if you come along this, because it basically replaces all your links with an AJAX request and then replaces the whole screen. You don't use that. Please don't use that, because there is a link and you can just use that. And the good thing is everything is declarative, right? You can look at your HTML, you see what it's doing, and the server code is not different, or not so much different from a classical web MVC application. So, conclusion. Does it spark joy? Yes, I would say so. What have we done, or what have we achieved? We removed a lot of complexity, right? We have just kicked out the whole Node.js stack for our use case. And we have pushed this barrier for single-page applications or full-stack JavaScript further to the right. So if we have now something like, we need dynamic interactions with the form, or we need to load something, we can use this approach instead of shifting to a single-page application, which would, if costs, change the whole architecture of our application. We can move faster, I would say, because we don't have contracts, right? You don't have an API, you don't have API versioning. If you need something, you directly have access to the data and the templates. You can just change it. You don't have different teams. And you invest in long-living, framework-agnostic techniques, which is generally good, right? HTML, CSS won't go away, for sure. And the teams are not split anymore. That's fine. But again, nothing comes without salt. So when to use it? Form-based applications, enterprise applications, for sure. That's a good thing. You have a CRUD application, so some internal administration, whatever. That's good. You have an e-commerce application, also very fine. You have nested UI elements and controlled updates, right? You click something, something changes. That's good. What's not good is uncontrolled or unrestricted updates. So think of misusing out-of-band swaps, right? You just click something, the table changes, and 5 other things, 10 other things on your page change. That's the path to maintenance hell. And of course, if you are bound to a JSON API from an external service, that's not something that would work, because I think 5 minutes left, right? So you have to use Hypermedia. And of course, when not to use it. You have an offline requirement for your, a friend of mine worked for a company or at university with trees planted and experiments on trees, and the experimental things are somewhere in Eastern Germany, in middle of nowhere, and there is no internet. So they had a tablet, and the first app they had was bound to internet. And they said, well, we can't use it, we just put it on paper. So if you have a hard offline requirement, it's not a good idea, because you have to interact with the server. You have many dynamic UI elements, think of Miro or Figma, and they are connected or not connected. That's not a good idea. They are updated frequently, like in Miro, also not a good idea. You have to be aware of certain security implications. You need to loosen your content security policy a bit. With AJAX on or AJAX triggers, you open again the path for XSS attacks. You can inject HTML if you are not careful. But of course, you can combine these approaches, right? You can start with hypermedia and static HTML, and if needed, you can add, I think the JavaScript community calls it dynamic islands, where you put a small part on your page with a full-blown JavaScript framework to use the power of the browser. An example from a real-world project I'm working on, we have also server-side rendering with FreeMarker, but there is a part where you have to move around boxes of something and connect it with arrows and so on. So basically some graph interactions. And of course you don't want to have a server-side interaction for moving this box from left to right. So it's a client-side interaction with a client-side framework that does the heavy lifting for us. And it works very well. And fun fact, it's something we built 10 or 12 years ago already with jQuery, so the cycle in IT comes back again. If you want something to read, I can recommend these two books. The one is on the left from Wim de Blauwe. Maybe you've heard of him. He describes how to build hypermedia-driven applications with Spring Boot. In this case, Thymeleaf, but as you've seen, it doesn't matter. The right book is from the authors of HTMX, from Carson Gross and some others. You can read it for free online, or you can buy an ebook, and it's very nice because it builds the foundation and the concepts of hypermedia revisited basically with different examples in Python and Flask. And if you like Wim's book, he contacted me yesterday when I was at the airport and offered me a 20% discount for you, just for Spring.io. So if you like, just take it, but I can send you the link, but everyone who wants to use the QR code, you're welcome. Okay. Some links. I will share the presentation. If you're interested in Vue components, you should check out Thomas' workshop from last year, I think. Here are some drawbacks of HTMX, right? You have to think of. And a cool application built by, I forgot his name, it's with Quarkus and HTMX and WebSockets. It's fun with flags, right? You know it from Danke. And yeah, it's very cool. Check it out. The example code I've shown you can find on GitHub and Codeberg. There's a picture, but don't fear, you can get the slides. The slides are online on my GitHub, so just find me there. So I think we have 2 minutes or 1 minute left for questions. You can find the slides there. If you don't have questions and want some beer, Hypermedia, I think this one sparks joy. We should keep it. So thank you very much and enjoy the beers.